Today we are taking a look at another Phenyx Pro instrument system, the PTG-11. Let's get started. Now, before I get into the video, I did record several instruments through this unit, so I encourage you to take a look at that video if you want to really examine how it sounds. This video will essentially be my opinions and takeaways. Now, Phenyx Pro did send me this unit to honestly review, which actually raises an interesting point. When I got this unit, I had hoped to use it on electric guitar when my band Visiting Wine played at City Winery a few weeks ago. We're already mostly wireless since we switch instruments so much. Because we use the Avid 11 Rack as a guitar processor into the X32, we're already at about 5 milliseconds of latency using a cable. Our Shure SLX-D systems that we use for our normally DI instruments add another 3 milliseconds, and personally, I start to feel a little disconnected with more than 5 milliseconds of latency running into my in-ears. The PTG-11 unit is analog, so it has no latency, so I figured let's use that for the electric guitar. For reasons that I'll say a little later in the video, I was fairly disappointed when I first tried this unit. I tried everything I could think of to improve its performance, but ended up using a cable for the electric guitar in that show. I reached out to Phenyx Pro and said, look, I appreciate what you're trying to do as a company, and so I'm struggling with the idea of making a review where I basically trash your product, but I'm not gonna lie about it. I would happily use this as a practice unit, but it really wasn't up to my standards for live use. When compared to the compact PTG-12, which I reviewed earlier, the wireless reliability of the rack unit came at the expense of a worse and slightly weird noise floor, especially when running into my particular rig. To their credit, they responded and, to paraphrase, said that they would actually prefer me to be critical and be fully honest in my review, as they're genuinely trying to improve their products as much as possible. Product aside, I really respect that, so let's take a look at the unit. The package shows up in this cardboard box, inside of which you will find an equally sized plastic carrying case. Included is the 900 MHz transmitter, documentation, the metal receiver, which feels quite solid, and finally the half-wave antennas and rack mount gear. The only button on the transmitter is an on-off switch. Nice and simple. When looking at the receiver, the front has a display, some navigation buttons, a volume knob, and a power button, while the back has a power input, there it is, 2 antenna connectors, a balanced XLR out, and a 1/4 inch output labeled as mix out. The setup is pretty simple. The instructions tell you how to run an automatic frequency selection, and then the transmitter can be synced via infrared. I'm not going to go through that step by step, but if you end up buying the unit, just know that it's straightforward. There are also ways to adjust the squelch level and to manually set the frequency. Again, straightforward, just follow the instructions. Let's move on to the good. I love the form factor of the unit. It works super well for surface-mounted guitar jacks. You do have to finagle it a tiny bit with sunken jacks, like in my Ibanez 5-string, but it doesn't fall out once it's in there. I love that it's rack mountable. If you aren't going compact to compact like the PTG-12, the option to rack mount is something I think every receiver should have. I like that it's 900 MHz instead of 2.4 or 5.8 GHz. It makes it work a little better when not line of sight, and it keeps it out of Wi-Fi territory. The wireless reliability on this thing is bonkers good. When it was the only thing on, I couldn't get it to cut out. When our full rig with 900 MHz IEM systems was running, all I had to do was find a clear channel and it was rock solid. It also tells you on the display which antenna is being used, as well as the radio strength. If you auto-select the channel and then with the receiver off, still see some radio information coming through, you might want to actually find a different channel. Definitely suitable RF reliability for live gigs. Lastly, as somebody who currently goes through about 20 AA batteries per gig, the rechargeable nature of this unit is very welcome. All right, let's talk about what I think could be improved. Firstly, I asked the company if there was hardware available to mount 2 units in a rack side by side, and currently there is not. I'm sure you could find a DIY solution, but if you're a mobile sound guy like me or in a band with an in-ear rack like my band, consolidating and condensing things is a must. This is small and nitpicky, but label the 1/4 inch output as something other than mix out. The XLR is already labeled balanced. It's probably safe to call the 1/4 inch output unbalanced. I have a feeling that I'm about to interrupt myself. Hello everybody, cutting into this review really quick coming from my basement. I just wanted to jump in because while I was writing the script to this review, I thought in my head, you know what, there's one pace that I haven't put this unit through yet, and I want to make sure that I'm really being diligent and thorough with it. And that one pace I didn't run it through was actually just plugging it straight into an analog guitar amp. I plugged it into an amp before, but the amp I was plugging it into was a Vox modeling amp. Now, it's a great sounding amp and it has a tube in it, but it still has a computer in there that's doing most of the processing. The other times that I was using it, I was running it either into my Focusrite into the computer, or I was running it into, the Avid 11 rack that we use live, or, using a ukulele or an acoustic guitar straight into our Behringer X32. The noise that I was getting from it, which if you watch the other video where I went through all the sounds, the noise I was getting from it was very sort of garbly and weird. It had this noise floor that wasn't just the hiss that you would normally get from, the Behringer preamps or from the preamps in the Vox amp. It was like an actual electronic noise issue. And that was only brought out more when the 11 rack was distorting the sound. See, I don't use analog amps for anything anymore. When I'm playing musicals, I use the 11 rack, or if it's a simple one, I'll use the Vox amp. If we have to bring an amp somewhere that doesn't allow us to just go DI with the 11 rack, then I'll bring the little Vox amp. However, I did have an old Princeton 65 sitting in my basement. I was like, let me try this through that, just to be really sure that if I'm saying it's noisy, that it's actually noisy. So let me play the sound of this through the Princeton 65. As it turns out, this unit isn't that noisy. When going through an analog amp, the unit sounds fine. Interestingly enough, I didn't hear any of that weird electronic garbling, so I really think that that was just due to the fact that I was running it into our fully digital setup. Now, does this make this product more useful to me? No, we use digital equipment in my band. I'm not going to change from digital to analog just because of this cheap wireless unit. I will say though, if you're using analog equipment, this is actually kind of a viable option. Now I'm going to go back to the original review to tell you the other situation in which I do think this is a useful unit, but I just wanted to throw that in there to make sure I was being thorough. Other than that clip that you just saw by postscript pre-film me, the one other time that I found this unit to be usable was when I was using it to send a digital piano or keyboard directly to my Focusrite audio interface. The unit could, for the most part, handle the keyboard at full volume, which let me keep the electronic noise at a barely noticeable level. If you're a keytar player with a totally self-contained keytar, this could be your cable-free dream. In the end, would I use this unit? Probably not. Would I recommend it to somebody who uses an analog guitar amp, doesn't want the negligible latency of a digital unit, and doesn't want to drop almost twice as much on a bigger brand? Yes. I know it's a very specific recommendation, but that was the only way it wasn't frustratingly noisy for me. I'll put an affiliate link to this unit down below if you're interested in checking it out, as well as to the other equipment that I use in my live sound rigs. I hope that helped you in your search for wireless, and thank you for stopping by. I'll see you next time.